All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We are so pleased to see you here. The numbers have skyrocketed over the past couple of days, showing a real interest in this topic, and we're excited to be here. Before we get started with the BCBA voices, I would like to talk a little bit about equity and how this project came to be. So this is a series of sessions that are being offered. And while we have a session for educators, we are simultaneously doing a session in evenings for the next month with families. And both of those series of sessions have been funded by the Connecticut Health Foundation, which put the ask to us to get the word out to make life easier in this age of COVID specifically for families of color. That is who they wanted us to target. And so Open Choice obviously is a very good program to help target youth of color and their families. So before we get started with the behavioral aspect of things, I just wanted to put the lens of equity out there and quote the president of the National Education Association, who said, "Here's the reality. Structural racism is the pre-existing condition that has destined us to be where we are, where our communities of color are disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus. We shouldn't be shocked." And that was reinforced this morning when I heard the news. They had monitored where people, and it was 3 southern states, where people were getting the vaccine. And indeed, primarily white people, when you look statistically, the percentage of white people in the state, in areas of the state, specific towns, cities and towns they were looking at, and people of color, the number of vaccines that have gone out to communities of color and whites did not match the population. The data was not comparable. So indeed, people of color are underrepresented in terms of vaccinations versus the incidence, which at least in Connecticut, African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to have contracted the virus, and Latinos 1.5 times more likely as whites to have contracted the virus. So that is the reality, and the other half of it being that not all people of color, but many that go to your districts and live in Hartford some of them are experiencing food insecurity. In communities of color, there are more intergenerational families. So families are really afraid about sending their child to school and then coming back and abuelita might get infected. So there are a lot of different concerns that families have. And then couple that with, I'm sitting here in my dining room doing this. Well, there are many families in Hartford that they can't work from home. They have to report in. So again, a luxury that is not given to all people. So my ask is that you see these trainings through that prism and give some extra help and kindness to the children from Hartford that attend your schools. So that being said, I give it over to our experts to talk about behavioral things.
All right, thank you. I'm going to just share screens and sound. It's not allowing me to optimize for a video clip, so I hope that's not going to be problematic. But
if you close out of that and go stop sharing,
yeah,
there's 2 little windows on the bottom that you need to check off.
There's only one that's available to be checked right now, and it's the same. So okay. I'm not sure why that is, but it's not allowing me to check the optimize for video. But
you may need to be host.
Okay. To do that, well, if we run into problems with it, we might be back, Gloria, to see if we can be made host. So can everybody see the Engaging Disengaged Learners title?
Yes.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right.
We'll be playing a guessing game for a while.
All right. We're all grieving losses during this pandemic. And if not the loss of loved ones directly, certainly the loss of our old ways of life. For many of our students, they are missing connections with teachers, other kids, a sense of community, the opportunity to come together with a team of adults that serve as role models outside of folks they know in their home. Efforts by teachers to engage learners during this time has been amazing. I was blown away before the pandemic at how much actually goes into making a day of teaching run smoothly. And now we've added simultaneous virtual classes, maintaining online classes, fielding an all new set of parent concerns, and solving advanced technological. I was doing an observation 2 days ago in the morning, and I was watching a teacher who had a class of in-person learners, the virtual class, and on the virtual class, as she wrapped up the class, a parent came on the screen with a concern that their child had missed the first half of the lesson. And she had, one child that had already been to the nurse that morning, me observing in her room. And she, how many balls can you keep in the air at the same time? And she was pleasant and warm and wonderful with this parent. And I just thought that it's true what they say, that this is not described as nothing short of heroic, what teachers are doing during this time. As behavior analysts, we know these things because we often have the privilege of coming alongside teachers in their efforts to reach students who are presenting as the most challenging, the students who lack resilience, who are the neediest, who are now probably the most likely to become disengaged learners during this time. So a little bit about the role of a behavior analyst as we're presenting. In addition to working routinely with students on the autism spectrum, as behavior analysts, we get called in when students are struggling behaviorally. Our role is to get to know all of what's driving that challenge. We meet with team members, we talk with teachers, we talk with the student, we talk with parents, and we try to understand from all angles what's driving that behavior. And with that information, generate an effective plan to help intervene and effectively improve the behavior and the challenges that are happening. And then we also assist in implementing that plan. So does it always work? No, but, oh, sorry, I forgot to advance the slide. Does it always work? No, but by your stumbling, the world is perfected. And I love this quote. It is, in the same way, lesson plans don't always go over the way teachers might expect, but it's through a process of teaming, of coming together, collaborating, sharing information, taking a look at what we did. Was it effective or not effective? Did it work or not work? That we get to move forward and keep the elements of what makes our interventions the most effective. In preparing for today's session, we did the same thing. We asked a group of, we are part of a group of 12 board certified behavior analysts and board certified assistant behavior analysts that are practicing in classrooms and working alongside teachers again. And we asked them for their stories of what works and what doesn't work in terms of engaging disengaged learners. And today we wanted to share some of their stories, as well as some of our own stories, as well as give you the opportunity to brag constructively. So feel free to, as we go, please type things into the chat. Caroline's going to be monitoring the chat as we go. Please also understand there's a lot of you. And so we won't be able to comment on all of your comments or share all of your comments. But please type it in. Caroline's just going to pick a representative sample, we hope, and share those. There are slides at the end of each guiding principle we've identified for an opportunity for us to share what's in the chat room, as well as you feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in with stories of success, or even stories that you've learned things that don't work, because that's how we move forward more effectively. As we listen, if you think about it, what we've done when we said we've asked our colleagues to share was we recorded the Zoom meeting on which they shared that, and I've edited it and kind of built those into this Zoom meeting. So look at the times we're in. We're going to be watching a Zoom meeting of a Zoom meeting in a Zoom meeting here. And I understand we're recording this, so somebody down the line will be watching this yet another step removed. Okay, so as we listened to our team, we did break things down into 5 guiding principles. The first of our organizing principles, which Tanisha is going to jump in and talk about, is to be flexible and persistent in solving problems that come up. And Tanisha, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Greg. For those of you that don't know, I am the Open Choice Behavior Support Specialist. So I'm available to teams to assist with all sorts of things. So feel free to reach out after this, and I can help troubleshoot some things with your team, as well as the rest of the Open Choice Resource Specialists and Family Engagement teams. But with that, you know, as educators, we're not new to problem solving. But this pandemic has certainly tested our ability to think creatively as we try to reach those students and families that need us the most right now. The barriers that persist in preventing students from logging in and engaging can seem insurmountable, but it's important that you know that you're not alone and that now is not the time to give up. I would like to share with you one of our conversation clips where we discussed examples of creative problem solving that's been happening all around schools in Connecticut. And we hope that the strategies that we share with you today spark new ideas and new collaborations as you continue your advocacy for our students' futures. And with that, Greg, if you could start the clip.
Sure.
Well, I was just talking about some of the students that I've had where the families are really the ones that need to sign in because the students can't do it independently. And when the parents weren't signing in, the teachers had to kind of go above and beyond and not just send the link for the meeting, but maybe like use a Remind app to send the parent a reminder about the upcoming meeting so that they were aware beforehand and kind of prep them for it. And I've also had, you know, teachers that are just so persistent that if the parent's not responding to an email, then they're sending a text message or giving them a phone call, and even going out to visit the house. I mean, I had one, you know, district where the student, you know, is very needy, needed hands-on materials, and, you know, the teachers were giving weekly deliveries of, you know, things that the parents could be using at home. So I think the persistence is what was the key in getting the kids and the parents buying in.
Sounds like persistence and flexibility and willingness to not just do it one way, but to do it the way that was the best fit.
You know, I don't think she was very savvy with email, but a text message usually got a reply. So, you know, that was the way that you could connect. So I also have a student who is nonverbal, and he lives with his custodial grandparents. And during the closing back in the spring, his grandparents are neither of which are very tech savvy. And, you know, even just getting them to respond to an email was difficult. So the teacher did try various formats to, you know, get them to participate in some kind of interaction and learning with him. And they still did not sign on to any direct sessions. They, you know, were just kind of adamant that school was school and home was home, and, you know, even delivering the materials directly to the house to try and get them to, you know, just increase his generalization and maintenance of some skills. You know, some of the materials ended up being returned in the box and never opened. So, but I think the persistence on behalf of the teacher, you know, was notable.
So this one started out with a middle school girl who had was having trouble engaging. She's opted for only remote learning for the year and was having a lot of difficulty turning in her work, logging in for her classes, and and her teacher was able to connect with her. She shared, well, I can't do it because I've got siblings downstairs at the kitchen table and this one's over in that room, so I have to do it from my room. It's the only place that I have, but then I'm in there by myself and I have my phone and I just can't put my phone down. And so the teacher was able to sort of try and make a plan with her about, let's figure out a way for you to set up a space that is going to help you, stay focused and get your work done. And then that same teacher, tries to reach out to the grandma. The grandma is the guardian in this family, and reaches out to her every week and was trying to work with her on, okay, how do we help this girl, young lady, get a better environment so she can get her work done. And during all those conversations, all these other logistical things came out, like grandma's only around to help her on Tuesdays. And this, young lady needs support to, get some of those activities done. So the team worked and made a bunch of accommodations, ranging from consolidating all of her, work and assignments to one Google Classroom, changing her due dates on assignments to allow for her to really get a lot of the work done during her time with grandma, so she could have that support. So her grades and things wouldn't be affected, just given the her availability or scheduling to get the work done. So it's just continuing to be an ongoing, the team's now just in communication every week, and we continue to make accommodations and do these logistical things to try and help keep her engaged. So then I have a student, also a middle schooler, who was coming all the time to school on his assigned cohort days and then having trouble logging on his days for remote learning. On one of his in-person days, he had shared that he was having some technical issues with his Chromebook at home, and his mom was not able to help him. She was had one thing or another going on, but wasn't able to help him. And the typical procedure for a student who's having technical difficulties is fill out your help ticket and wait for somebody to get in touch and help you. But in this case, we were kind of able to use our knowledge of another staff member who has some technical skill and set up a just phone call that very same day. In this case, it happened to be the principal, and he was willing to do it. Said, tell me when and I'll be there. And we set up a phone call that day with the principal to that student, and he was able to walk him through and solve his problem. So he was able to log on and has been joining ever since. So that's a definite success.
So those were just a few examples, one of which included a situation where the efforts did not produce student engagement. And this is the unfortunate reality that sometimes we try our best and it just doesn't work. But the important takeaway there, though, is that with flexible and persistent attempts, you can reach more students than you don't. And to increase the likelihood of improving engagement, there are a few areas that you should consider problem solving around. The first being communication with families. Try regular communication through various channels. While email or text may be your preferred form of communication, sometimes using apps for notifications and the old-fashioned phone call might be the most preferred method for a family. And also, don't underestimate the power of a home visit, particularly for those kids that you may not have met yet. They might not have been in your building yet. Use these communications for both good news and involving the parent in problem solving. That's really important to keep the lines of communication open and that relationship to be reinforcing for all parties. The second area you should consider is the student's home learning environment. And this hasn't always had to be a factor for us in education, and so, but it is one that is glaring now. And so sometimes asking the students and families about what specific barriers they have in their home can really help you figure out what's getting in the way and then start that problem solving together. One great example of this resulted in a team discovering that a student had only the couch or their bedroom to work in. And so in order to make a more structured learning environment, the team delivered an old student desk to the student's home on the same day. And this is an exceptional example, but it really highlights the importance of the home environment needing to be conducive to learning and how families sometimes need our support in creating those structured environments. Another area is the virtual environment. A lot of our kids, that is where they're getting all of their education right now. And so, take some time to look at your students' virtual portals through what they see. So look at their Google Classroom and make sure that you understand what they look like from their perspective. So for students that have several different teachers and service providers, you might want to consider making like a single Google Classroom somewhere where they have all of their things, and then have service providers enter the student's classroom for individualized lessons. This will reduce the amount of navigation needed to successfully get to each meeting. I know as a parent of 2 remote learners, when school is remote, that is often difficult for me, because there's different meeting codes and this link for this teacher's in that room. And so just be kind of mindful of that. Also, remember that peers right now are, for our remote learners, are not as accessible as they are in person, and peers are really reinforcing, particularly as you start getting up into towards middle school and high school. And so our virtual learners they're missing that. And so if you can try to use, be creative, use breakout rooms for activities and pair them with friends and other peers that they might enjoy being around. It could make everything just a little bit more rewarding, a little bit more kind of enticing to log on to class if they know that they're going to get to see some kids that they haven't seen in a while. For students that are really struggling to attend from home, particularly for long subject blocks, you can use Peras or other staff, and to create maybe some brief 1 to 2 minute summaries of what the content presented. That would help them get a summary. And for most that aren't attending to a whole synchronous class, they might be able to get some content out of those summaries that they wouldn't otherwise, particularly if they're not attending the whole time, they're leaving the computer, they're coming back. So consider some of that. When you do have classes, another kind of creative way to use Peras is set up their own virtual classrooms, and where a student can go if they're not able to stay in the whole group lesson for whatever reason, they're not regulated, they can't attend, maybe they don't understand the content. But have that video link open and ready, and then they have a place to go and a person to see for extra support at the time of the class. If online attendance, just isn't working, consider sending home paper and pencil packets each week. I know some schools do for their remote learners, they set out packets outside of the school. Just consider your Hartford families and how maybe that isn't as easy for them to pick up those materials. And so by also utilize those great online academic programs out there, such as Lexia, Raz Kids, Symphony Math. They are great at tracking progress. You can see what a student has done. And I know that many schools, if not all, are using these, but for online learners that aren't attending, consider using them a little bit more. They're engaging platforms, and it really helps at least make sure that they're getting some structured instruction if they're not attending virtually to your class consistently. And another really important area to consider is just the student schedule. When are they expected to be somewhere and for how long? So if a student is if getting them to school is the goal, you might start to see some resistance, and that might be proving challenging. But just kind of a note on that is when they do start to come back to school, consider being flexible with their schedules, abbreviated schedules, adding maybe an extra day if they need some catch-up time. You know, if they're in a hybrid model for 2 days a week, maybe they get a third. Just try and be flexible within that. And then pay attention to the students' due dates and the total online session times, and sometimes seeing if you can synchronize that, coordinate that with schedules of the family. So if the families right now are the primary means of getting a student online, then we really should try as best we can whenever possible to accommodate that time, so that maybe the parent is available maybe in a later afternoon to get some things done and help their student. Keep schedules and meeting times consistent when at all possible. So many of our families have more than one student at home. And so it is a struggle to keep track of meetings with different start times on different days with different teachers. And just because you might be really familiar with your schedule, just remember that that doesn't mean that they're as well versed in it. Particularly juggling their own work schedules, appointments, and then multiple kids in one remote learning session. Sometimes sending home a printed copy of a schedule that they can hang on their refrigerator can be extremely helpful. If everything lives online virtually, there is a little bit of response effort there, several steps to get to that schedule. And so just ask if a printed copy would be helpful. And sometimes we also need to be flexible in our own expectations of how much time we expect a child to be in front of a computer. And I know that there is this great push and need to get them some academic instruction time. But for some of the learners that aren't able to get there, we need to consider reducing the amount of work that's expected or online time that's expected of them. And the goal here is to prevent the student or the parent from being overwhelmed and just ultimately giving up altogether. And so setting small expectations at first to sort of hit the reset button will hopefully allow the student to gain some confidence, gain some skills, and a feeling of success. And then with that, you can absolutely gradually build that expectation back up, but you will build that back up with a more solid foundation and hopefully a better relationship with the student and family. And so in these strategies that I've just suggested, I mean, it's clear that there's a level of creativity, flexibility, and persistence that requires the input and coordination from several resources, many different team members. As a teacher, you can't do it alone. And so developing teams that include administrators, teachers, parents, don't forget your open choice resource and family engagement specialists, behavior analysts, and other related service providers, can really make all the difference in the effectiveness of your efforts. And so with that, do we have any questions or comments before we move on to the next section?
Kim Guzzo gives 2 great tips in the chat. She's said some districts have sent materials home to families on school buses that go to remote or hybrid students' neighborhood. A contactless home visit offers the opportunity to build the relationship, but if that isn't possible, there are other ways to get materials and positive notes to students. She also mentioned one district has a community group that's building simple desks for students who need them. And then Jill Zano suggested recorded voice memos sent through text message for families with voicemail that's full or not set up is an option for communication, that this can be helpful when reading might be an issue. It's a great suggestion.
Those are really great tips. So, I mean, with that, Greg?
So it is the little details that can make or break whether a student gets to participate and sign on sometimes. And so I love the examples of sort of persisting in solving those problems. The next guiding principle on our 5, the second guiding principle that we ended up talking about in our discussions was prioritizing relationship and connection. When all this pandemic started last March and it was beginning to ramp up and schools were closing, I was consulting for 2 classes of students with emotional disabilities. And we knew immediately that we were going to lose some kids, and we knew that we couldn't afford to lose any kids. And so these were students who had already had struggles in the mainstream, ended up in self-contained programs. Parents were already resentful and distrustful of the school. The students' connections with schools were tenuous. We knew that the relationship we had built with these kids were not only that we were supporting academics, but also that we were supporting their lives, their ability to cope with challenges, their ability to make wise decisions that kept them out of the juvenile justice system. And we realized that we were oftentimes significant influences for good in the students' lives. So right away, we didn't want them to become one of the statistics. This was published an article last month in NPR. We didn't want our students becoming one of these statistics. And so early on in the closure, we formed an engagement and incentive committee. And the purpose of the committee was to connect with students who were in danger of falling off the grid. We immediately developed a tracking system, kind of using the stoplight motif with the red, yellow, green. And so each week we sort of shared information about where students were at in this system. Red being students who we had not heard from the previous week. Yellow being students who were signing on sporadically. Perhaps they had a combination of a Zoom meeting or 2 assignments turned in, or an assignment turned in a couple Zoom meetings, but they were not regular attendees. And then the green, which we worried less about folks in the green zone who were signing on regularly and completing assignments regularly. And so we knew immediately if somebody was in the red zone that we needed to target them for an intervention. And if we called and they said, oh yeah, they're just visiting grandma, they'll be back on at the end of the week, not a problem. But if we had trouble getting through, if we heard stories that the kids were resistant, we arranged a home visit. And so we put on the masks, we socially distanced, we stood on the curb outside the kids' home, and just seeing our smiling face and saying, we're rooting for you, we're missing you, was usually enough to get kids to sign on. And then when they signed on, we were hoping for them to contact our incentive system. As behavior analysts, we like to do things right. So with an incentive system, we always like to complete a preference assessment so that we know that our reinforcers are truly meaningful to the kids, that they're connecting. But when we asked teachers to fill out the survey, it was all too crazy and too busy, and they weren't going to do that, which was probably sensible. So we went with what we knew, and that was food. Now, some of you are looking at me and probably judging me right now because I was definitely contributing to the nutritional downfall of our youth, because there are candy bars and sugary drinks on this list. But we also did some pretty creative things like Zoom meetings with my dog, who you haven't heard from today, thank goodness. Dances online, Go Noodle dances online, Uno games, Hangman, various things that are just fun. Because as we're talking about building relationships with kids, a lot of it is sharing time together, having fun, making sure the kids know you're happy that they're signing on, genuinely welcoming them, sharing time together. So yeah, we identified incentives, made those available. We also wanted the process of delivering the goods to be fun. And there's lots of ways that you can make reinforcers available to kids. You can just put pictures of the things you have. Here's what I got. You can pick from one of these things. you can turn it into a game show host kind of a thing. Jamal just signed on 2 days in a row. Johnny, what do we got for him? And you can kind of put things up that way. We decided to go with Spin the Wheel for kids that signed on. And for those of you that aren't familiar, this is a Tiny Decisions app. You can also use Pick or Wheel online, which is a little more easy to share virtually. But just so you get a sense of what it is, this one is one I developed for my granddaughter. And it has things on here like a piggyback ride, an aerial sticker, a princess Band-Aid, and some different things. But if you just push it, it spins and picks one for you, and boom. So in this case, she would have won, and I have the sound off. It kind of does a nice little celebration, but you know, I'm presenting. Piggyback ride, won out. So there you go. So it just makes the process fun. And that's really what we were after. We're not thinking that a Gatorade is going to get the child to extend their time in program and overcome their fears and hurdles and sign in, but it helps. It's a little perk. So as we came across warm weather, we thought maybe we can extend some of the time that we are connected with kiddos. But again, once, as Tanisha had said, once they were signing on, they were seeing their friends, they're seeing the smiling face of the teacher, accepting and greeting them, all of those things. As we did this, we used differential reinforcement. So we had, for kids that were in that red zone, that were not signing on, just showing up earned a spin. And we had a different wheel for them. It was meaningless to offer somebody in the red zone opt out of an assignment. So we didn't put that on the wheel. They were already opting out of all assignments, right? So for those folks that were in the yellow, we had a different set of reinforcers and rewards on the wheel. And then for those folks that were showing up regularly, we could be, we had a different set. And we tried to make some things on the green wheel only available to folks that were signing in regularly. So there was a $5, flat out $5 for signing on. And they had not an opportunity in the spin to win that as a prize. So, so as we talk about relationship building with kids and staying connected with kids, the question comes up, what does that mean in a teaching format? And I think it is believing in your child's goodness, believing in the child's ability to, capability of mastering material. It is being willing to listen, caring about the challenges that they're having, all of those things. And so we'll listen to some of the examples from our online meeting earlier as to what folks had to say. And Ada is queued up. Ada's wonderful. So you'll get to hear some of theirs. There's a positive example here. And again, like with Tanisha's, there's an example of what can get in the way of building effective relationships.
You know, we didn't know if we were ever going to be successful, but that we knew maintaining a good relationship with the student and a connection with her and her family was going to be important just for the future. So staff even volunteered, like recognizing that they might not get her to get on and do all of these classes, but they have done things like just go to her house to go for a walk with her. Just to like not talk about school, but just to like maintain that connection and have a good relationship, because we know that that's what's really important for her if she's, you know, in order to ever get to that point where we get the work done or when she's eventually back in the building. So I thought that was one nice thing.
I have one particular girl who has struggled with attending virtually. She has missed most of her classes, logs on for very brief part of the day, is supposed to be logged on all day. She has, when we met with her, she reported that she loves certain subjects, one being English. And she thought that she did really well in it. She had just started high school this year, hasn't had a chance to develop any relationships with teachers because she physically hasn't been present in the building, but said that she loves English, and one other, I think science was another loved subject. So anyways, when we had asked, well, since you love these, why aren't you signing in, you know, particularly English? And she said that she wasn't doing as well in it as she thought that she should, considering she feels herself skilled. And so when asked, why doesn't she feel that she's doing as well? And then, you know, what makes her think that or know that? And she had mentioned that when she did log in, she spent a lot of time on a particular assignment around October, so kind of the beginning of the year. And the feedback that she got was criticism and a poor grade. And that grade didn't match what she felt she should have got. And so she admitted that from there on out, she didn't put a lot of effort in to that particular subject or school in general.
Okay, so just taking a walk, and then what gets in the way of maybe the relationship, which felt like judgment to this girl. And we're not suggesting that to build relationships, you need to give out A's. I think the issue here is that when somebody has been absent and they're signing on for the first times after a stretch, that it's fragile. And we need to kind of look out and reward the efforts that the child puts in just showing up, and not greet them with, hey, here's what you missed, kind of a thing. So Caroline, how are we doing? Are you monitoring the chat?
Yeah, I am. We have some good comments about relationships and flexibility. Katie Kartnick said, with families who have multiple children, we've assigned a district point person for communication, typically a person who has the most positive relationship with the parent. Teachers and related services staff communicated info to the point person, who had a phone call with the parent once a week. Before we did this, parents were overwhelmed by multiple emails per day from the teacher, case manager, related services, etc. If there was para support for more than one student in the family, we had one para service the family, have one Google Meet where the first 30 minutes was the first child, usually the older child who understood the schedule more, and the second 30 minutes with the second child, much easier to coordinate. Like that's a super idea, because we all get just overwhelmed when too many people are calling. Melissa Roy suggested, she left the URL for Wheel of Names game. She said you can make your own choices, not just names. Kim Guzzo said, one student we worked with was highly motivated by food and would often write about chicken nuggets and McDonald's. So one home visit, we delivered leveled books and Happy Meals for him and his siblings. That's a great idea.
Fantastic.
Thank you all for responding.
And if anybody wants to unmute themselves and join in and share anything during this sections, you're welcome to. Thank you for your comments. Keep them coming. All right. The next organizing principle we identified for reaching disengaged learners has to do with identifying and teaching essential skills. And Tanisha, this is you. Did you want me to start with the video here, or are you?
Nope, not quite yet.
Okay, let me know.
Thanks. So when students engage in problem behavior, such as not attending or participating in class, being distracted when they are there, not completing activities and assignments, and even more serious behaviors such as property destruction and aggression, it's because there's a skill deficit there, and they literally don't have the skills to do something different in that moment and setting. And so these skill deficits often impact a student's ability to access their education. And so which is they fall further behind can result in even more problem behavior, sort of a vicious cycle, if you will. And so as educators, we're very familiar with teaching academic skills, but there are other sets of skills that are pivotal to a student being engaged and successful. And so these include basic ready to learn skills, such as attending to the teacher or the computer, despite distractions, being calm and focused, and appropriately interacting with materials. And so taking a look at those, even for older learners, they also need help with organizational skills. So which now includes organizing an online environment and being more self-directed in your learning while at home. And social skills, such as appropriate interactions at appropriate times in a virtual setting. And so how to read nonverbal body language, recognize social cues and norms. And obviously, most recently, a whole skill set of technological skills, how to operate a device, how to log into your Google Classroom, how to keep your device charged, and, knowing basic troubleshooting skills. Sort of all of these skill sets are really important for a student to have to get them to the computer and be successful while we're there. And so it should also be noted that skills necessary for in-person learning can be very different for skills needed for online learning. They're really two different repertoires. Even take a look at a college student who chooses to be online versus brick and mortar. By college, what type of learner you are. You can make that decision for yourself. Kids are sort of flung into this right now. And so we have to be aware that just because maybe they were really great in school and now they're not, just be aware that it really is very different. And so if a student has never been in a school, for instance, they've just started kindergarten, they've just started middle school, or they've just started high school remotely, these skill deficits can be glaring. And so on top of this, it's also important to keep in mind that if they're behind academically, whole group instruction can be highly aversive to them because they're not understanding what material is being presented to them. And so, the pandemic has certainly magnified these skill deficits for all students, but even more, they just continue to miss instructional time. And so many Connecticut students have essentially disappeared. That means they won't have the skills necessary to rematriculate successfully, hopefully next year. For our younger students, it could significantly impact their future success and feelings towards themselves as a learner. And for our older students, this puts them at greater risk of not graduating at all. And so the following examples in this next clip explore ideas for how to identify these gaps in skills and to find ways to teach to these deficits to further decrease those barriers to engagement.
Denise, how does it feel to watch yourself on video while you're watching yourself on video?
For real.
Sorry, I'll get into it. Here we go.
Back in December, we created a task analysis, sorry about that, in regards to opening a computer, turning it on, going on the correct website, etc. It was probably a 12-step. And what the teachers did, because we didn't know if they were going to come back, we didn't know what was going to happen in January. What we did is we ran a TA on each one of those kids about 5 times to ensure that each step of going onto a computer, they could do exactly as independently and exactly in the sequence that the teachers needed for it to happen. And there were a couple of kids that required some additional instruction, or some kids we just knew, we said they're going to go home and really not know what they're doing. And those are the kids that we would tap into the parents for. But we'd know it wouldn't be the parent would say, he didn't call you, or, oh, you mean you didn't log in? Oh, he couldn't get on. Yeah, actually, he can't get on. We have a TA that says, and we wouldn't say this to the parents, but we have information that we actually measured out his ability, did some testing on that, and he's at 100% to be able to follow those steps. So it was very helpful. Not everybody came back. So, it was all for naught, but it was a nice measurement of a student's capacity to follow through with that routine.
We're not out of the woods yet, Michael. So you want a TA in school for how to do it independently at home?
Yes.
Awesome.
I think for some students, just practicing at school, being online for instruction with somebody in another room is helpful for many of our students who, had not experienced that. Just, how do you relate to somebody on the screen?
had a student that last spring when the shutdown happened. This was a student that when in person was really difficult to engage and didn't attend. I was doing an in-person FBA, and then when COVID hit, everybody went remote. He did not access any education virtually at all during the spring. He very much would avoid any instruction, any academic program, and would find other things to occupy himself. So when they came back to school, he now had missed, and he was a kindergartner, so he had missed a lot of the foundational academics that would have been presented to him last year, and then that carried over into this year, where he continued to not access instruction. What we had found through the FBA and sort of using that magnifying glass at the behavior to see what might have been causing it, we did find that the inability to access instruction at the level of his peers was one of the biggest barriers for him. And so what we had tried to do was implement a method of ABA called precision teaching, which takes a look at skill building at a very microscopic measurement level. And so we targeted reading for letter sounds. And so what we found for a student that had almost no first grade academic foundations at the level that he should, due to not attending any instruction prior, was once he learned those letter sounds and we taught them to him probably in about 3 weeks, he started to all of a sudden be really excited to use Lexia. He started to be excited to use Raz Kids, to pay attention to what his teacher was saying, because he could recognize that he knew what they were talking about. And so as such, he now is can access that instruction when they do go virtual. They've been in and out virtual. So where he didn't access it at all, now he 100% participates in the educational platforms and is really excited to try Pebble Go, which he never would have got there before.
That's fantastic. So what looked like a behavior problem was really a skill deficit in decoding. And you said it was a 3-week intervention. What?
He learned, he went from 9 letter sounds to 22 in 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah, we saw the love for learning develop within about 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, and he actually went from, he was a child that would say the alphabet and then say, I learned to read, I read, to one day looking at me and saying, I'm a reader, when actually reading a book. So both of these examples, they included identifying a specific skill deficit that may result in a form of problem behavior or potential avoidance of accessing instruction. And so assessing the student's performance of that skill and taking a targeted approach to teaching that skill to mastery really kind of help treat that problem behavior. And so we often get consumed with assessing skills through standardized tests that focus on measuring a student's ability to perform various academic skills. But by narrowing our focus to skill deficits that impede a student's success, we can really increase the likelihood that they can access their education to learn those bigger academic skills. And so this approach for some students to seek to replace a problem behavior by teaching what's called a cusp skill. So those are skills that once learned, they kind of open the door to the acquisition of other skills just by having that first skill. An easy example of that is a child learning to walk. Once a child learns to walk, they get access to the world, and then they start to learn many more things. And so the takeaway that I'd like you to have from this section is that for every problem behavior that you notice about your students, notice all of the skills necessary to replace that behavior and to sort of teach to that. And so any questions or comments on that section?
We had a flurry of questions and comments that I'll share. Linda loves the positive approach. She said her goal was to put a smile on a child's face, telling her how excited I was to see her. Kristen said, wondering if anyone has suggestions on how to create peer relationships in an online environment, thinking especially of elementary age children. Anani responded that she does lunch bunch every day using breakout rooms. It's a great idea. Sarah mentioned that she tried once a week breakout rooms that have a theme that children can choose from: gymnastics, Pokemon, dance party, Roblox. We find it focuses the discussion a bit so that the conversation is easier than just open chat. We now have older children coming so that they have a mentor, 5th grader, in each room with our 2nd graders, and they love it. Kristen said she loves the idea of using older mentor students in this way, that it creates another layer of community. Christian asked, did you, and this has to do with your precision teaching example, Tanisa, did you incorporate incidental teaching within his environment to further strengthen his new skill? So I'll let you answer that, and then I'll give you the other comment.
Yeah, absolutely. He started to want to look at books, you know, and look at text other places such as bulletin boards. And so once he kind of knew the letter sounds, we did start to do that incidental teaching and kind of taking it out of that sort of discrete trial setting into where he would find text more readily. So yes, but that discrete trial kind of setting was necessary to sort of get his attention and build that skill level up so that he would want to pay attention to other things.
And I wanted to mention that approach can work virtually as well as in person. We have people working one-on-one doing direct instruction virtually as well. A little harder to control, but it does work. Kim Guzzo mentioned several districts that she works with have connected elementary kids and families with high school virtual mentors. They have collaborated with high school guidance departments to match students of color, preferably freshmen or sophomores, so the relationship can continue for several years with the young students. Claire gives regular music breaks from Playing for Change, a great site that has kids from all over the world performing popular songs. Okay. And Christian's going to be graduating and taking his BCBA exam soon. Congratulations.
All right. So we're up to number 4. The 4th identified organizing principle here is supporting families to engage kids that are disengaged and help them get back. We know that the better a family is functioning, the better students will do in school, and the less gets in the way of them achieving. There's a pitfall, and I think that there's a temptation with educators and with parents to easily sort of, when things aren't going well, kind of point to the other, almost in blame. And so as educators, we sometimes lament if only the parents would put this child to bed at a reasonable hour or feed them at a different, we can get caught up in that. And I think the same applies to parents, as they can get caught up in, if only the school would do these things, it would make us. And that doesn't work. What does work is genuinely supporting families, understanding, not judging, and genuinely supporting families. We know just having kids home full time right now is stressful. It changes everything. And if you have 2 parents trying to juggle work and juggle lapses in childcare and trying to manage virtual learning, never mind somebody who's a single parent during the midst of this pandemic, what they must be experiencing and going through. We also know that kids kind of save their worst behavior for their parents. And here we are asking parents to be responsible for helping their kids sign on, overseeing them completing assignments in a virtual environment or in a hybrid environment even. It was hard enough when they just had a little bit of homework each day, let alone what we're asking them to do these days. So supporting families is a vital piece here. I recall consulting, I was asked at one point by a social worker to be in touch with a family where there was a power struggle happening. And I got on the phone with the mom to kind of talk about what was going on. And she indicated that I've taken his phone. And we know this child, and we know that this did not go over well. And we were not seeing the child in school. And so, nope, he's got an attitude problem. He's not doing anything I ask, and he's disrespectful, and I've taken his phone. And the child, when I talked to him, said, she took my phone. I'm not doing anything she asks or wants. She wants me to sign on to school. I'm not signing on to school. And so he was staying up late at night, sleeping through his classes. And it was this power struggle. And so we set up a series of meetings with them, and we kind of worked through some of the things that were issues. And there were lots of issues. I mean, issues that normally affect families, but that when you add the stress of a pandemic and the full-time situation to it, just puts people over the top. And so some of the issues that came up were that the child was eating too much all day long. And so the parent had some foods that were near and dear to her heart that she didn't want eaten. And lo and behold, the child was eating those foods. And so we sort of went through some problem solving about how to fix that issue. And in the meanwhile, there's more issues that are coming up. So that there's a PlayStation account. And in fact, a PlayStation account, they shared one for the family, and you could only have one user on at a time. So if the student's brother and his mother wanted to go on the PlayStation in the living room, the boy could not go on the PlayStation in the basement. And so the mom was saying, we're going to get you your own account. And he's like, I don't want my own account. I've leveled up all these games. I've unlocked all kinds of treasures. I'm not going to lose that. No way. You get your own account. So it was becoming a power struggle that way. So really going in and helping them solve some of those problems helped resolve some of the stress for the child. And he got his phone back, and life got better very quickly. And we started seeing him back in school. But sometimes it's a very different level of support that families need. And we need to recognize, I think, that we don't have a lot of information about what's happening on the other end of things, and that looking to support as best we can is critical towards engaging those learners. As we take a look at some of the examples from our outreach discussion, here's Michael.
When their kids are arriving home and when they're getting up in the morning, there's no routine or expectation. What should I expect of my child? They won't get up in the morning, they won't do these things, etc. So for a couple of teachers, I set up a home schedule. And I'm going to see if I can pull it up. Just bear with me one moment. So it's nothing more than a sequence of 5 checks, very similar to like a token economy. But it's really specific stuff. Mom sent us in a list. She said, here are the things that I wanted to do when he gets home in the afternoon. I've got phone calls from a couple of parents that says that it's working great. What the student is doing is coming in with the morning routine. If they've finished all of their tasks and they got all of their points from mom, they get choice time for the first 5 minutes of walking into school. So just an automatic reinforcer. Based on the fact that they were compliant and cooperative with their parents at home. So,
so you're reinforcing the kids at school for completing a checklist contract for home routines.
Yes, yes, I am. It kind of seems like it goes against my grain sometimes, because I like home to stay home and school to stay at school. But the parents are asking, how do I get them to comply? And the parents aren't really as good at providing reinforcement. They'll say, well, you didn't do that the right way, and send the kid off to school, but he'll still get his check. And the kid is looking, saying, okay, but I finished my schedule. Yeah, as a matter of fact, you did. And we'll check with mom, and we'll make sure that things are okay. That's what parents are asking for. And we're giving it to them, and it's actually effective for parents. They're coming in and they're saying this is working great. And it's also effective for the kid because he's walking into school. He's coming in off the bus happy. He's excited. He's looking to cash in. He gets that cash in time plus the verbal and social reinforcement from staff. Okay.
Do you have any resistance moving from reinforcement into work for schoolwork in the
I
morning?
haven't yet.
Sounds like you clarified expectations for the student of exactly what to do. You held the parents accountable to not changing those expectations midstream, not upping the ante in terms of what they're expecting, and provided a consistent reinforcement program.
The parent called originally to say that although he's doing well at school, he's not cooperative here at home. What can I do to make it work? We said, let's set up a contract.
Any, in terms of talking with the parent about it and setting it up, did anything come up along the way?
I took precautions to ensure that I use visuals as well as words, because the parent would say, well, he doesn't really read that well, or he doesn't take his time and read the script that's on there. So I set up a visual of his hanging a bag up, his sitting down and his setting the table, his doing housework and chores. I find those visuals are very helpful for the primary ed kids, like anywhere from K through 3-4.
Usually there's some pushback about merging home and school, and we know that there's not a clear delineation in between. One influences the other. So I think that what you did sets up the school day, as you said, the students coming in positively. That could be a motivation for the staff at school in delivering the reinforcement. The fact that the staff is doing that and supporting the parent then probably builds more trust on the parent's part in the school staff.
Yeah. Sometimes in these situations, we have parents who says, yeah, I'll do it, and they don't follow through, or they're not willing to follow through. A parent who doesn't have a lot of buy-in, I find there's a lot of, I'm going to just call it access force stuff that goes on. Parents that have their own addictive issues, who might be unemployed and be suffering from some other kind of issue as well, and they don't have a lot of time and energy for their kids. So when you do get a parent who calls up and says, what can you do to help me? If they're asking for something specific and we can create it, I think that's helpful too.
Okay. So some great examples there for setting up some structure, reinforcing and supporting parents with reinforcement in school for helping provide that structure. What, Caroline, any comments on this?
Yes, Linda has a very important one. She said, it's hard for students with the background noise going on in the family as the student's trying to learn. I don't know how my students do it. Dogs barking, babies screaming in the room, parents talking or yelling, toddlers at their feet, many high fives to the students participating and trying to learn on the computer. That's so true. And some of our students are caregivers as well. They're the ones home caring for those other students.
Right.
May I ask a question related to that?
Of course.
So I've noticed it is very distracting sometimes when I am connecting with my students virtually. The TV's on, the siblings are all over the place. What are your suggestions? Is it to work with that student to kind of help them engage in that environment? Is it to work with the families? Is it to do both? Is it just to do the best you can in that? What do you suggest? I don't want to overstep my boundaries, but I want to also help and put structures in place to make it best. So just curious.
Who wants to take it?
I will. I think that is a very common problem right now. And so taking a look at that creative problem solving, going back to thinking about the home learning environment and having a really problem solving conversation with a parent, and kind of, you don't have to immediately start sort of prying into what's going on, but just sort of asking them, what space does the child have? Are there better times of day? And if you approach that with kindness, and sort of like, I want to help, and start there. And there's going to be things that we cannot fix, and that's just the reality and the nature of this beast, but there might be other times of day, maybe that works better, maybe when, maybe during nap time for the baby, or, things like that. But just really ask the family, ask the student. And then at the end of the day, looking at options for instruction that maybe aren't that synchronous thing where they have to attend and sort of drown out all the competing things going on. Maybe it's when you get a chance, here's an asynchronous lesson plan, or here's this packet I'm going to send home, and just sort of kind of put everything on the table right now and sort of see what works best for each family.
Yeah, and there is a practical, you do have to mute all that background noise if it's wrecking the Zoom meet for other students and whatnot. So I think it's reasonable, of course, to mute when they're not talking. But your concern is that the student can't focus in that routine. So yeah, I think what Tanisha said applies.
One of the things that I did in my class is I featured the little kids, all the toddlers, all the babies for the good morning meeting. It was like all the kids could come and I'd say, good morning, Abby. And this little 2-year-old would go, good morning. And a baby would be in a kid's arm. And then I'd say, okay, kids, time to say goodbye to the little people. Yeah. Bye, little people. And they'd all walk them out of the room. And every now and then another one would sneak in and I say, oh, I see a little person. Remember, they come first thing at morning meeting. And then they have to go play in another room. So that's how I got some of the babies out of the room.
Linda, that's fantastic. Thank you. Any other responses?
I think if you've developed the relationship with the parent, finding something that you agree with them on, like, I know how hard you're working to make sure he makes class every day. Let's think of how we can make it easier for him. You're latching on, you're not coming at it from, you aren't turning the TV off, or you aren't doing this. You're talking about the things they are doing, and then how you might be able to make it even easier for the child to succeed. I think that you can get a little farther that way. There are some notes here. Let's see. Claire has started a Facebook group off the PTO page for remote families to connect. That's a great idea, especially socially. Mary said that they've encouraged the use, sent home headphones for students to use to help them concentrate on synchronous meets.
Beautiful.
Our morning is anyone aware of community providers organizations that specifically service East Asian families? We have a family that we're struggling to engage as the student is remote. I know for a while CREC magnet schools was had some interpreters available at the beginning of the pandemic. It might be worth checking with CREC to see if they have anyone that, I'm not sure what language your East Asian family speaks.
You can also reach out to one of our open choice resource specialists. We have Celia Noe at the high school level, Jenny Maldonado at the middle school level, and Kim Guzzo at the elementary level, as well as Carla Cruz and Tyrone Waterman for family engagement specialists. So certainly reach out to the open choice team and we can help problem solve that for you.
Okay. And with that, we are up to our 5th organizing principle, which Caroline, I believe you're taking, which is increase support when needed.
I am. This is when you put on your hero cape. There are those situations when you've tried the basic supports, you've tried to be flexible with students and they still aren't engaged. You may need to reach out to other specialists such as BCBAs, guidance counselors, social workers, school psychologists, open choice or family engagement specialists for assisting you. It's particularly true for those students with special needs. Some are struggling with relating to a computer screen. Some are struggling with motivation, some with the competing excitement of video gaming, TV, and all of the other reinforcers at home. For those students, we need to step out of the box in order to get them back on track. By doing whatever it takes on the short term, we're able to get them quickly back on track for the long haul. And that's really the key. Interventions might include working with parents, as Michael did, to get daily routines in place to support virtual learning or in-person attendance, helping a student develop strategies to handle anxiety around the pandemic. Some of our kids are extremely anxious about going to school and bringing home germs to family members. And that's particularly true with our students of color where the population is at higher risk. We have to work with some students on desensitizing mask wearing and other restrictions, teaching them how to socially distance so that they feel comfortable going back to school. Overall, just going the extra mile to make it work. I think of a situation that we had in a district with a student with autism who had been outplaced. The outplacement agency was closed due to COVID, but was offering virtual services. Now, this is a student who had not been successful in district, had been outplaced, and now was out of his outplacement at home doing nothing and regressing. The district was still paying a great deal of money for the outplacement, and the student wasn't participating or attending at all. And they called us in to help. In looking at the situation, we actually sent a BCBA out into the home to support the student. Our BCBA was able to work one-on-one with the student to sit alongside him to access the virtual class and gradually reinforce him to be on the screen. He then gave reinforcement to the student for being able to tolerate attending the virtual class. After the class was over, he worked with him on then generalizing skills, working on some activities of daily living at home, and just building that relationship. This continued for a couple of weeks, and the student started going on to class independently and started getting reinforcement from the BCBA, but also from the screen from the outplacement staff. Just last week, the student greeted the BCBA at the door with completed worksheets that he had already done that he wanted to show off, and he had done those independently. He's now successfully attending his virtual classes each day and is preparing to go back into a hybrid model, going in person 2 days a week. While that's an extreme example, it illustrates individualizing programming. It's expensive to send a specialist into a home. Doing what it takes saved this student's educational program. It saved what the district was trying to provide in terms of the outplacement and allowed the student to benefit and progress. The intervention was just short term. As a team, we've had to use our detective skills to figure out what's keeping a child from being successful. Then we have to intervene as early as possible to make it easy for them to be successful. We don't want kids practicing not being successful. We want to be able to get them on in some form as quickly as possible and let them know we're happy about that. Quick, intensive intervention that is individualized to the student can save some of these tough situations. So I'll end it with that. Any questions?
Thank you, Caroline. Actually, right now in the comment, I think we're winding down. People are saying thank you, great ideas, etc. So
at a time.
Nothing specific to escalating, but we can go ahead and wrap up. And bear with me, this is a repeat slide, but I love this quote. And so the message here is great. To me, it is maybe it should read, by your stumbling, by looking back, noticing what you stumbled over, taking a different path next time, the world is perfected. And so as a practitioner of applied behavior analysis, this to me is the analysis part. It's keeping your eyes open to what is working and what's not working. It's the science part of what we do, right? But as BCBAs, we get to see the heroic efforts that are going on by teachers right now. And the message here is that you are more important in the kids' lives than many of you sometimes realize. And take good care of yourselves. I understand, Gloria, there's a yoga session coming up that people can sign into. And so that would be fantastic. And as the last message said, escalate and get support when needed for yourselves and for your students. Thank you so much, everybody. Any final words? And with that, Gloria, do you want to take us out?
There is a self-care session coming up, so check into that. Hopefully you have signed up for that. And that conveniently is done toward the end of the school day, like 3 or 3:30, so that you're not skipping out on some responsibility during your workday. So you will hear back from us in terms of getting this video back so that you could share it with other people or watch it again. I'm looking in the comments that a lot of people got useful tips and thanks for a wonderful workshop, a bunch of comments about ideas and strategies that are appreciated. So thank you very much for attending, and we will see you via video soon. Be well.